going on, everybody? It's RoyJ coming at you with a brand new video, and for those that have been keeping up with the lore of the channel, you'll probably know that I just attended the other day my very first Yu-Gi-Oh! Regionals, which is probably a bit surprising to some of you if you've been around on the channel for a while, but also if you've been keeping up with Twitter, which you totally should for news, channel updates, shitposts, and more, then you'll know that this is no surprise. Now, this isn't going to be like a recap video or anything like that. I'm not going to go over like all of my matchups and everything, because I did all of that in a regional vlog that I made, which you should totally check out. It would mean a lot because I put a lot of work into it. It's there that I showcase, you know, the start of the event, right before, right after, and then of course I break down my rounds in between rounds because you can't actually record the gameplay, of course. But most of you that did know that this was happening will know that I ended up piloting Branded at the event, and I gotta say, I did a lot better than I expected, or about like the exact same as I expected. About 5-4 in a 9-rounder, kind of scrubbed out in the last round when I was X3, which could have technically gotten my invite, but very unlikely, because my opponent that beat me also didn't get his invite, which sucked. Which is kind of annoying, because I was hoping to get the invite to snag it to go to Austin, which is literally an hour drive away from me. But, you know, there's always a few in the Legacy of Destruction format that'll come out to try and get that invite. But I was genuinely impressed with how the deck played out. Probably helped that I didn't get Ash Blossomed literally the entire event on my Branded Fusion, which is crazy. But I think that the deck is in a really good spot, and I think that even if Sanctifier got banned, it would be perfectly fine, because while you couldn't do a Puppet Lock or anything, some of the stuff that this deck can do is just absolutely insane. But with all that being said, I don't want to waste any more time. Let's go ahead and get into my in-depth Branded deck profile from the Fort Worth Regional in March 2024. Starting us off, of course, with the Despia monsters, I was only on 2 copies of Aluber, as well as the 1 Tragedy and the 1 Ad Libitum. So other than the 2 Aluber, this is pretty standard, but the reason I dropped down to the second Aluber was A, to accommodate the Ad Lib, which I wasn't playing in the first place, because I was like, I don't want to break on a bunch of big level monsters that can't do anything in hand, but I'm not playing the Dark Magician or anything like that anymore, so I decided to throw him back in because I really miss just the insane end boards that he can provide, and I'm really glad that I did. But the second Aluber is also just to get it down to a clean 40 cards, because otherwise I didn't really want to go too far over 40. I wanted to try and be at 40 if I could, even though in Branded it's not like super important, but bricking on multiple normal summons was just so bad. I was drawing like double Aluber Quem Albaz and stuff like that, and it made me want to go insane. Granted, given that the Ad-Lib did technically replace the third Aluber, you know, opening an Ad-Lib instead of that would still not be like the best thing ever, but it would still give you at least something to do with that card in hand because it actually has an effect. Plus, you already have like 3 Branded opening, 3 Branded fusion, so you don't have to see the Aluber all the time, etc, etc. So many different ways to access your Branded fusion and your Quem and stuff like that, that it really does not matter if you hard open the Aluber or not most of the time. Other than that though, like I said, everything was pretty standard. Speaking of Quem, we were on 1 copy of Quem and 2 copies of Cartesia. Very, very standard here, nothing too crazy. Cartesia was amazing as usual, and Quem came up a lot more than she did in testing. A lot of the time I was like, yeah, you kind of gotta play Quem for like the Puppet Lock and stuff like that, but honestly, now that I've been going for the massive Branded end board, Quem just puts in a lot of work, especially because a lot of people will target her because they don't want to see something like a Mirror Jade come back from the graveyard. For the Bestials, we are simply on the 1 Lubellion as well as the 1 Sarnir. Honestly, if I had more room in the side deck in hindsight, if I cut like the Shadal package, then I absolutely would have made more room for like more Bestials, you know, like a Magnamut, a Druisworm, a Ball Drake, stuff like that, maybe even 2 Druisworm, because the Bestials would have been really good against the matchups I faced against, and they're just pretty decent in general, but I played against like 3 Voiceless players and a few other decks that played like Lights and Darks in their grave, where the Bestials just would have been really, really good compared to the Shadals, which were doing kind of nothing the whole event. For the main deck though, I feel like this is pretty standard, and I wouldn't really alleviate from it. For Albaz and his friends, we are on, of course, 3 copies of Albaz himself, as well as 1 Albion the Shrouded Dragon, and 1 Tri-Brigade Mercurier. So I'm still on the 3 Albaz over the 2. Drawing him is actually pretty decent, especially if you do open Nib alongside it, which I'm just going to explain now that I do have Nib in here. But it's also a good thing to discard to have engraved for your Rinbrum or for your Quem and stuff like that, and then also running out of Albazes is honestly kind of a death sentence 99% of the time. Albion the Shrouded Dragon, of course, is Albion the Shrouded Dragon. Nothing too crazy there. And I'm not playing Gold Sark or anything like that, so I am only on the 1 Mercurier. There were times where I did wish that I had a second copy just for the negate, but that was less so like for the banish effect or whatever that some other people are using it for, like the second copy of Allure. Plus, I didn't really want to brick on Mercuriers, really. And finally, as I mentioned, to round off the monsters, we are on 3 copies of Nibiru. Now, I know Branded is kind of like notorious for not having room for non-engine, especially hand traps, in the main deck at least. But I think that Nib was a really good exception, especially because I didn't own the second and third thrust to go into the fusion duplication package, which I probably would have played otherwise if I had those. But Nib actually put in so much work. He came up almost every single time. I mean, I nibbed my very first opponent, and then I nibbed one of my opponents twice, I nibbed another opponent once. Like, it just came up a lot. It did suck that a lot of my matchups were voiceless, though, and that deck kind of just ignores Nib because it'll either negate it or not even hit 5 summons, period. But even then, you know, it was still fine as discard fodder and as a light target for Albion. But I also just really loved, especially in my game 1, that was like the first thing I did, when you nib your opponent and then you normal Albaz fuse off with the token and then you go off into like a Mirror Jade or like Albion plus something else for a game. And he actually had nib for me as well, but I played it just under 5 summons. I hit 4 summons and I managed to OTK him there because in battle phase I just used Mirror Jade for his Druid Swarm and it was really, really good. That is it for the monsters. Moving on to the back row, we of course have 3 copies of Branded Fusion. Like I said, I literally did not get ashed on it the entire event, which was kind of insane, not gonna lie. But Branded Fusion didn't even come up a lot of the time. Well, like, not a lot, but like some of the time at least. Because I had ways to fuse with like Cartesia and stuff like that, and Albaz and stuff. So there was a few games where I won and I didn't even use the Branded Fusion, which was crazy, but of course Branded Fusion is Branded Fusion. We're also of course on 3 copies of Branded Opening, not too much to say there. It accesses your Aluber and your Quem as well. And for the rest of like the miscellaneous Branded back row, we're on 1 copy of Lost, 1 copy of In Red, 1 copy of Retribution, which I'm going to go ahead and try and center this all a little bit better, and 1 copy of Banishment. So everything else is pretty standard, of course, you know, the 1 In Red, 1 Lost, 1 Retribution. We did have like 2 judge calls, or maybe it was at least 1 judge call on the Branded Lost, which is pretty funny. But y'all, do not sleep on Branded Banishment. This card is insane. You can easily utilize this to summon back powerful cards like Mirror Jade or other fusion monsters, and then go ahead and super poly with your opponent's board to go into even more stuff. It's kind of just an insta-win against like any fusion deck because you can just summon back your thing and then use their stuff to make Dragostapelia. And don't even get me started on the Mirror Match because the Mirror Match relies a lot on this card as well as Super Poly, which was shown because my opponent who actually ended up getting top 4, Rawl, he actually opened Super Poly 1 more time than I did. I literally had a super huge hold on the board. I was about to win, he was about to pass turn, except for the fact that he had Super Poly and then was able to keep playing, and it was kind of nuts. But yeah, Banishment is just super, super huge. Really, really like it as an additional thing to have on the end board, especially if you open Branded in Red or have to use it to dodge Imperm, because otherwise, setting opening doesn't really do enough. We are also on 3 copies of Fusion Deployment, and 3 copies of Super Poly for some more 3-ofs. I feel like Super Poly doesn't really need to be explained. It just put in so much work. Literally every time I saw it and resolved it, I kind of just ended up winning most of the time, except for the Mirror Match exactly. And then also Fusion Deployment. I know some people are dropping this down to 2. I do end up siding one out a lot of the time when I'm going into games 2 and 3. But other than that, I feel like dodging cards like Imperm and Valor is just way too important to cut this down to 2 in this format. For the final 3-of, I was on 3 copies of Nadir Servant. Now you probably noticed that I am on Nadir, but I wasn't on anything like Branded in High Spirits, I wasn't on Maximus, Spriggan's Kit, anything like that. And that's because I don't really want to play like all those soft garnets in order to access this like kind of niche combo that might resolve, might not. Because you'd probably just draw more extenders anyway if you didn't play those cards and then bricked on them anyway. But one of the big things, like the really big things, is that this format has a lot of voiceless players, especially my fucking format, apparently, because I played against mostly voiceless players. The last thing you want to do is Maximus send 2 things, and then your opponent ends up hitting you with the 1-2 Arclight and a Tuss, and then full combos on their turn, because your end board you made wasn't enough, and now your Maximus is dead, so you can't fuse with it, yada yada, stuff like that. If this were like any other format, like if this were the format beforehand, where we didn't have voiceless or like the Snake Eye stuff, and I was still playing branded, I probably would play the Maximus, you know, be pretty decent in like the Unchained matchup and stuff like that. But other than that, Nadir Servant on its own is still perfectly fine. What I usually do is I send Lululith in order to get a Cartesia during the end phase, and then I search either Albaz if I haven't normal summoned, or Quim if I have. But I still, a lot of the time, I will search Albaz just so I can go into a Mirror Jade on the opponent's turn. Or you can also use it for like the Rinbum plays as well. So like what you can do is you can go Cartesia, fuse it off with Albaz, go into Albion banish, you know, an extra deck thing, and Albaz, like whatever you dumped off Nadir, like the Lulu, obviously. To go into the Mirror Jade, and then if you have another way to dump Albaz, like if you did access your Quem, it's pretty nuts. It didn't come up too often this tournament to be specific, but during testing it came up a lot, and I will definitely consider keeping it in the deck because it's just so strong. And then finally, for some one-ofs to wrap up the deck, we have 1 copy of Thrust, 1 copy of Talent, 1 copy of Foolish, and 1 copy of Called By. Thrust came up literally 1 time, and it immediately got negated, so it didn't really do anything. Talents didn't come up at all, I don't think, funnily enough. I don't think I literally resolved this ever during the event. Foolish, of course, dumps Tragedy and stuff like that, and I think I discarded it the 1 time I drew it. And then Called By came up once against Ash and didn't really do anything other than that. Actually, no, it came up really nuts in the Branded Mirror. Both Rawl and I did the exact same thing, where we Called By at our opponent's Mirror Jade in Graveyard, and then chained our Mirror Jade on field. And then the next turn, Mirror Jade, because its effects were negated by the Called By, we were able to send again, and then on the 3rd turn we could send again, and it was just kind of ridiculous. It was really funny, but other than that, most of these one-ofs didn't really come up too often. Moving on to the extra deck, we have 2 copies of Mirror Jade, 2 copies of Albion, and 1 copy of Lubellion. For like the main important ones, quote unquote. Obviously 2 Lubellion would be pretty nice if there was space, because there are some decks like Castro that can rip things out of your extra deck, but thankfully I didn't play against that matchup at all. I really hate the Castro matchup, it's just so boring. But other than that, these were pretty standard and didn't really need any explanation. There is also, of course, the 1 Sanctifier, 1 Rinbrum. Both these cards came up a lot in their own ways, Sanctifier, of course, being for the Puppet Lock. I didn't really summon it other than that for the entire event. Never summoned Rinbrum either because summoning her isn't super relevant anymore compared to like a Castro format with a Rise Heart. But Rinbrum herself in the graveyard is really solid. Came up a good few times to get that Albaz on board, fuse off with the opponent's things, or even just to threaten it being there was really good. Also, only on 1 copy of Granguino, the Dusk Dragon. I decided to only play the 1. I didn't really have the space for the second one. I didn't really feel like the second one was necessary either. A lot of people are like, oh, 2 is just completely standard now, but I really disagree. I don't feel like it gives too many benefits, really, because by the time you get the second Granguino on board, you're really going to have gone through a lot of your extra deck resources, and it's just not really gonna matter. The 1 copy, of course, did come up a lot, though, sending Adlib, sending Albion, sending Garura. It just did a lot. Surprisingly enough, though, the second effect didn't come up too often, because the times I did make it, I usually banished it to fuse it off with something, so that was pretty interesting. I was also playing the 1 Queritus as well as the 1 Masquerade. No Priskenian or anything like that. I know I saw some lists playing Priskenian now, which is kind of weird. I mean, it'd be really good in like super poly situations like with Banishment, but other than that, it just felt a little bit too niche. But these guys came up perfectly fine. Queritus being most of the time summoned off the Granguino, but sometimes just summoned normally. And then the Masquerade being good. I didn't go into time or anything like that. In fact, there was only 1 time I actually got close and we weren't even paying attention to the clock. We didn't even know. But like Masquerade came up a few times to pressure life points and stuff, as well as to summon itself back from grave, or at least it would have in one of my games where I completely messed up and I wasn't able to protect myself because of it. But both of them just fit their roles pretty decently. For some miscellaneous fusions, we have 1 copy of Dragostapelia and 1 copy of Guardian Chimera. And then the Super Poly targets were, of course, Garura and Mud Dragon. These were pretty standard, honestly, not anything too much to say here. Dragostapelia came up a lot to, like, at least bait out disruptions and stuff. Guardian Chimera just absolutely shredded through boards. It was insane. And then the Super Poly targets, of course, were Super Poly targets. I don't think I actually ever made Garura, now that I think about it. I think I just dumped it more than anything. But I made Mud Dragon a lot, and Mud Dragon came in clutch a lot of different times. The targeting protection is just so good. But other than that, the only thing left in the extra deck is the one Despia and Lulualilith. Never summoned this, of course never hard making it, but I never even summoned it off the Conginia or anything like that. I just dumped it off the Nadir Servant the couple times where it did come up, and it was perfectly fine at doing that. And of course, it wouldn't be an event breakdown without a side deck, of course, which is really cool because I never really do side decks too often. But I have one copy of El Shadal App Cologne, one copy of El Shadal, or not El Shadal, just Shadal Dragon, one copy of Ne Shadal Aerial, and 3 copies of Shadal Fusion to start off this side deck. So this is what I mentioned when I said the Shadal package earlier in the video, and I have mixed feelings on the package. So in testing, it came up a good few times. Funnily enough, Shadal Fusion functioned more as like an Ash bait than anything half the time, which was pretty funny. But it was actually also a pretty good way of utilizing it because I'd rather have my Branded Fusion go off than this most of the time. But the idea behind the Shadal Fusion package, if you didn't know, at least this one in particular, you Shadal Fusion a Fire King Snake Eye opponent, you dump these two and summon the App Cologne, you use the Aerial to bait out things in the graveyard, you get rid of the Promethean Princess, or at least force them to activate it, you get rid of the Garunix and other stuff like that, and then use the Dragon to pop the field spell to nuke their board, and then use the App Cologne to imperm the Sanctuary in case they have it to protect. Otherwise, you can imperm, literally anything else. And this would force out a lot of disruptions, any negation if they have it, and some stuff they probably wouldn't even be able to stop, like their Garunix getting banished if you go Chain Link 1 with the Aerial. It was really, really solid in theory. The main issue is that not only did I just not see the Shadal Fusion outside of one game where I already sent the Dragon off something else, but even if I did, I literally only played against one Snake Eye opponent, one Fire King Snake Eye opponent, and that was in my very last round, and the Shadal Fusion just ended up not really coming up at all. And because of this, it just kind of ended up taking a lot of space up in my deck. So I mean, Shadal Fusion, the package is good in theory. The main thing is that I just didn't end up seeing it, which really fucking sucked. Probably be better if I had more copies of Thrust so I could guarantee more ways to access it. But one thing I will note is that while I probably will end up taking out like this part of the package or something, I'm considering keeping in Dragon in the future because this card actually came up 3 separate times, even though the rest of this package didn't come up like at all. Twice I pitched Dragon off of opening, which helped me out things that were important in the back row, like the Voiceless Trap card. And then once it came up off of dumping it off of Branded Fusion, I don't remember like everything it helped ended up popping. I know one of the times it was a Runic Fountain, which was huge, and it forced out like a bunch of Runic cards in hand just so he could use them, and I still ended up winning anyway. So I think Dragon, just as a dark target that can help out back row, I'm probably going to keep it in the side as a one-of because it's really, really solid. Other than that, though, I feel like these can just be super easily cut for more important cards in the side, at least especially after the next ban list and after Legacy of Destruction hits. Remember, we're going to be seeing a lot more Voiceless, which doesn't care about this card because they're not summoning from the extra deck most of the time, and also because Snake Eyes is probably going to get hit significantly enough for it to not be like a super like crucial quote-unquote thing. Even though it's not at least super crucial anyway, I just really wanted to play it. I was also on 3 copies of Droll and 3 copies of Ghost Bell. Let me go ahead and grab her here for some extra hand traps in the side. The Ghost Bell came up like once or twice. Same with Droll. I mean, they didn't really come up super intensely. I didn't play against anything super crazy like Dark World or anything like that where Droll would have been nuts. And then the situations where Bell came up, it was like, the Bell came up. Didn't really do anything too crazy. I belled way too late in the Fire King Snake Eyes matchup and stuff. There was a few different misplays I made in the Fire King Snake Eye matchup. I was so tired and it was the final round. But I mean, other than that, it was just kind of alright. Definitely want to keep both of them in though, especially the Droll for those like really jank matchups where they can just absolutely obliterate you otherwise. But the Bell maybe can be swapped out for things like more Bestials. Of course, it wouldn't be modern branded without a single copy of the Gimmick Puppet Nightmare. I didn't main deck it like a lot of branded players shockingly were at Fort Worth. I had a lot of people that I was friends with at locals or something. They'd come up to me and they'd be like, yeah, I got Puppet locked game 1, and I'm like, really? They're main decking it? Because I really do not like bricking on this card. So I explained it in the regional vlog, It was really, really annoying. But one of the things that happened was I had a really bad hand, but I was able to go into Gonguinho, and I sent Garura. And the Garura drew me into Gimmick Puppet. And then one of my patrons, because they had access to the video early, said, "You puppet locked yourself," and I never wanted to scream more. But yeah, in Branded, you kind of have to play this card most of the time. It's just a free win when it does resolve. I ended up setting up a few times. I puppet locked a hero player. I ended up hitting, or didn't hit them, but I ended up using it against a voiceless player, but I got belled. And then it came up in like one other match where it kind of just won me the game. I think it was a different voiceless player. But it was a lot of work put in by this card, even though I didn't even access the combo most of the time. And finally, to round off the side deck and the deck profile itself, 2 copies of Cosmic Cyclone. Really, really good against Anti-Spell in particular, though I guess it could also be really good against like Labyrinth, for example, which there was a handful of Labyrinth on the room. I just didn't end up playing against any of it. They ended up dropping to like the lower tables most of the time, I'm pretty sure, which is another reason why I didn't want to play Labyrinth this event. But I probably would play a 3rd copy if I cut the Shadal package, just to have a lot more extra outs. Really good against Runic Fountain and stuff too, or any other important back row pieces. And that is going to do it for my Branded deck profile. Really hope you all did enjoy. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I think it played really, really well. I was super happy with how it turned out. Most of my losses were just my opponent drawing better, not necessarily me drawing bad, period, or just me having a little bit of an oopsie moment, which happens to everybody. Not sure if I'll play this deck in future events, because I want to play some things that I like really, really enjoy more than that. You know, things like Goblin, maybe even Fire Brigade next time. Not too sure. It also depends on if I actually manage to get the time off work to go to those events. But Branded is definitely a deck that I want to keep on my mind in the future. But with that being said, that's going to do it for the video. If you liked it, please sure to leave a like, as helps put this video and the channel into the YouTube recommended. And if this content was more like it, like the rest of my deck profiles, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because support your channel or anything else, and it's absolutely free. Also, like I said, be sure to check out that regional vlog if you want more info on how the event went out. It was super, super fun. Also, who knows, supporting directly, we got to get some awesome teaching merchandise in the process. Check out Tapio cards and link down below. Use code AURORA5 for 5% off your purchase at checkout, and support me financially. They have a lot of really cool stuff, and I got a lot of compliments on my merch at the event. I got people talking about my Tapio cards mat, my dice, my field center, my primal being token, all sorts of stuff like that. They have some awesome stuff. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Aurora, signing off.